Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live again, coming at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is 9:56 TGIF. Happy Friday. And it's April 10th. Hope everyone's doing good. I hope people have plans. It's a beautiful day out today. I think the weather's supposed to be really nice. It's technically a couple weeks, 2 weeks into spring, so it's starting to feel like spring more and more. It's hard to believe we had snow earlier this week. Actually had like an inch or two. But anyway, I hope everyone's doing good. I hope have everyone has some fun plans. Hopefully involving movies as always. So I have a show tomorrow for it's like a fundraiser thing. It's at the American Legion Hall. There's a bunch of political candidates that are going to be there talking about running for office and all the things that they can can do or can't do. But I'm going to be playing there tomorrow with a band called Bookhead Sweet Tooth, which is a band that I've been playing with for probably about 3 or 4 years now. It's been a while. It's been a few years. Bookhead Sweet Tooth is a pretty fun band. It's kind of like I don't know how to describe it sometimes, but it's definitely blues based. It's definitely rock. There's a lot of I think there's like a Tom Waits kind of vibe, a little bit of funk, a little bit of jazz, a little bit of psychedelia. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty large band. Troy Youngblood is kind of the dad of the whole project. Dan Miller, Al Crichton. It's it's got we got like a horn section now. The last couple of years we've had Roger Gagnon and also Al Crichton. Pretty fun band. We haven't actually played a gig probably since October, so it's been a while. We don't typically play gigs during the fall or winter. We we tend to only play during spring, summertime. So this will be the first gig that we've had in a while. But we'll be playing at the American Legion Hall at 7 o'clock. So if you're around, come on by. That band was also about not this past summer. Well, actually, it was. We did do it this past summer. This 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 band went on tour a couple of times, and we did the summer before last. We went on tour, we went on a pretty big tour for about a week and a half or somewhere around there, and that was a lot of fun. We I hadn't done any touring in a long, long time, and it was fun. It was a really good time. It was a little bit hard because on our first trek, really, the first couple of days, the it was during the summertime, and the AC broke in the van that we were traveling in. So there were days of where it was a couple of days where it was really brutally hot, and it was not a lot of fun traveling. And then we did a shorter tour this past summer, and we had AC, and everything worked out. We didn't have to travel quite as far. The first tour we did, we went down to West Virginia, and then we kind of like worked all the way back. That was the bigger one, and then this past tour we went to New York City, New York State, and then we had shows in Pennsylvania, and then back to Maine. So yeah, that'll be fun. And also, I have a big interview scheduled for Film Fanatic, which I'm really really excited about. We're gonna be getting together. I'm going to be getting together with a really great filmmaker on Sunday, and I'm going to be doing a interview with Matt Anos, who is a really interesting and really cool guy. He's a kind of a local filmmaker, and his new film is coming out. There's going to be this big film festival happening, and I'm going to do a big interview with him on Sunday. I'm going to be going to his house and doing an interview and talking about this new film. I got to see an advanced screening for this movie, which was a first for me. I've never gotten perks like getting an advanced screening for a film, and it's pretty bonkers crazy. I think anybody who is a subscriber to this channel that likes some of the wackier shit that I cover as far as movies go, I think this movie is something you might really dig. So I'm really excited about that. So we'll be getting together on Sunday. I'm going to record the interview with Matt and then upload it shortly thereafter. So yeah, it'll be fun. So today's show is on a movie that I before I got a chance to finally see it, I had heard about this movie quite a bit actually. It would come up here and there, and I only saw this. I think when I finally watched, it was a little while ago. I've only seen this movie once, but this was a movie I really wanted to talk about. It's kind of part of the whole mockumentary. Basically, if you're a fan of kind of like the found footage mockumentary horror genre, this movie is definitely worth checking out. And I think just in general, it's a movie that is pretty effective. I will say, pretty effective. And when you think about the context of when this movie came out, kind of the climate for the folks who got a chance to see this movie, pretty interesting. If you're a fan of movies like Lake Mungo, which I think is a masterpiece, also, I've talked about this idea or thing around, as much as I love horror films, and I pretty much watch horror movies every day, especially the low budget, trashy exploitation kind of films or films in that genre. If when I think about, and I've talked about this before, films that generally are scary, movies that actually get under your skin and give you goosebumps, or, movies that really give you this sense of, I think, what, I'm going to leave the light on when I go to sleep at night, especially if I'm sleeping at home by myself. When you come across, I think for me, when you come across or watch a movie that is legitimately scary and it stays with you, it's not, it's kind of a rare thing. As much, and again, it's as much as I watch horror films all the time, my general feeling around horror and also, you know, my movie habits around watching horror films is, to me, it's like, it's just, it's going, it's like getting on a really awesome amusement park ride, and you escape for that, for those couple hours, and you have a really good time. It's fun. There's a lot of thrills and chills, if you will, and it just takes you out of your, you leave your troubles behind from the day. To me, that's what it is. I do think that there are aspects of horror that actually go a little bit deeper. I remember seeing an interview with John Carpenter a long time ago where he was saying how, not only it's the entertainment aspect of horror, and he was kind of, in this interview, John Carpenter was talking about, the horror genre, like its appeal to people, why it's popular, and why it's just a lot of fun, and kind of the serious side to being a fan of horror to a degree, and also the entertainment side. And he was talking a lot about, the that going into a haunted, going to a haunted house, going on a exciting going to an exciting amusement park, the thrills and chills, and having that roller coaster experience, and having fun, and escape from your regular day. That's that kind of the main thing. He was saying that's what horror does really well. But he also felt that horror is, to a degree, on a deeper level, is really cathartic. And he said that what horror, he feels, does is it really kind of makes you, as a person, kind of, to a degree, face your fears. Some of those taboos around scary scenarios or frightening scenarios that can happen to you in real life. And he said that with horror, it kind of gives you that outlet to experience those fears in a safe or healthy way. But trying, it also helps you maybe understand those aspects, but then just facing them. And that's a very powerful thing. And I do feel that way. I do feel that, that's, on a serious side, outside of the kind of the entertainment level of things, I think that's a legitimate thing. So I remember during COVID, I had a friend who sent me. It was like in the worst phase of COVID during. I think it was during the lockdown, but I had a friend send me this article. So it was about 5 years ago or so, which is crazy. She sent me this article about fans of horror and that people who are into horror, like really, really into horror films, were having a little bit of an easier time coping with the lockdown and the COVID scenario than most people because, again, they're in this thing of where they do face their fears and they are kind of in tune with that darkness. Kind of interesting, but for me that wasn't the case. When I was in that situation during COVID, a lockdown, I couldn't watch horror movies. It was weird because I it had the total opposite effect. Like I couldn't fear is an interesting thing, but it's a natural thing. But I had a very tough time, and I couldn't watch horror movies. I literally I remember watching, and I think I watched it like 3 or 4 times. But I at one point I was watching like E.T. multiple times. I couldn't watch any horror films because everything would give me an extra sense of paranoia and would just kind of generally freak me out. I would have to watch, you know, dramas or anything that wasn't horror related. I had the totally opposite effect. But anyway, it was an interesting article that my friend had sent me. But I do think, on a serious level, it does provide some kind of like therapeutic release. I know for myself, just watching movies, not only is it fun and I just really, 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 really enjoy it, it is cathartic. I really do. I do think it's kind of like therapy. And for me, it's if I go for a few days, without watching a movie, I start feeling, well, I'm a pretty weird guy anyway, but I start feeling really off. I start feeling like something's really off or wrong, and I miss it. It's funny. It starts happening for me, like I kind of go through this weird withdrawal. Like if I go say 2 or 3 days without watching a movie at night or just watching a movie in general, I start feeling a little bit off. And then if it's longer than that, I really start feeling discombobulated or just, yeah, it's really funny. It's really strange. That's something that hasn't happened. That started happening for me as far as like going through this weird withdrawal of kind of feeling or feelings. That started happening to me like the last few years. That never used to be a thing. Even, I've always been into movies, and even when I started getting into movies in the, after college, I started buying DVDs, and I used to watch movies all the time anyway. That never happened then. Like I would just watch a movie if I, went a week or I was out of town and I didn't see a movie or whatever. Never really thought of it. But now if I'm away, I will I will definitely have that feeling. It's really funny. It's really funny. I was in a relationship last year that was a situation of where we had our good times, we had our bad times, but we couldn't really, it was really hard for us to agree on movies. And there were a lot of times where I would be over there and we would just kind of hang out at her house, and we kind of wouldn't really do anything. And it was okay for a while, but then it was really tough. But not doing anything involved like not being able to hang out and watch movies. And that's when I started noticing it, where it'd be like 3 days, or whatever, where I wouldn't be able to just chill out on the couch or chair and watch a good horror movie or just a good movie. And I noticed it then. It's kind of funny. And it's gotten stronger. The last couple of times I was out of town, that started happening. Like that was when I got home. I was literally like chomping at the bit to throw in a movie. I remember the last time I was away or out of town for a little bit of a length when we did our tour about 3 or 4 weeks ago with Osmia. I remember when we came home that night, I literally was like chomping at the bit and I threw in a movie right away. Like it was like like kind of a crackhead who needs crack. I don't know. That's just how it is. It's funny as hell. But going back full circle here, bringing it back around, mostly talking about fear. But as I think movies, horror movies that legitimately scare you, that get under your bones, I think it's a little bit on the rare, on the more rare side of things. I think most horror movies just kind of really provide a fun kind of entertainment, escapist place. But movies that legitimately scare you, I think it's a little bit more rare. I think that list is actually a little bit smaller. So, and today's movie, I think, is a movie that kind of qualifies on, you could put on this list for movies that generally strike a deeper chord and did strike a deeper chord when the public saw it. And movies that I think legitimately are scary. I think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think that movie is legitimately scary. That movie always has a funny reputation because a lot of people who've never seen that movie always think that that movie is a total gore fest, and there really is. There's very little gore in that movie. I think that that movie, the strength of that movie is that it's such a psychological experience, and that's where the terror is, and it's so raw and it's unhinged. But I really think that that movie is legitimately scary. There's moments of that movie every time I see it, even though it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's one of the most important exploitation movies ever made, slasher movies ever made. I've seen it named by certain YouTubers as being the greatest slasher movie ever made, one of the most influential. But every time I see that movie, there's aspects of it that totally creep me out and really get under my skin. And then, movies like I said, this movie that I'm going to be talking about today is definitely part of kind of the more found footage, mockumentary kind of vibe. Movies like Blair Witch Project, which I think, again, in that kind of subgenre, I think Blair Witch Project is one of those movies that's like legitimately scary. Like it gets under your skin. And every time I've seen that movie, especially the first few times I saw it, it legitimately freaked me out. And there were moments of it in that film that I I could feel the fear creeping in, like legitimately scary. Another movie which I only discovered a few years ago, which I think is one of the scariest movies ever made, and I think it's one of the creepiest movies ever made, which I really want to watch again, is Lake Mungo, which is a Australian movie, and it's a mockumentary. Mockumentary. I mean, it's obviously a little bit of a different style, but I think like the mockumentary style or the found footage thing, they're a little bit different stylistically, but I kind of lump them all together. There's a few movies in that, you know, in that subgenre that are legitimately scary. Like I think Lake Mungo is absolutely an incredible film, but I do think it's one of the scariest and one of the creepiest movies ever made. I bought that on Blu-ray. I think that movie's legitimately scary. And I also think another movie that I think is really actually scary. I think the original Exorcist I still think holds up. I think that movie is really really scary. It has this next level about it where it gets under your skin. Yeah, and I think newer films like say modern films, well, I don't know if I mentioned, but Paranormal Activity, the first one, I think there's moments in that movie that are generally creepy, like legitimately scary. I think movies like Hereditary, there's moments in that movie that I think are absolutely unhinged and kind of scary. I think The Witch, especially the first few times I saw that movie, there were certain things in that movie just that really like struck me in this kind of terrifying way. So, so there's a good amount of movies out there that are, and I'm probably leaving out some, but there's movies out there that are generally scary, that generally get under your skin and really, and I think that this movie is kind of one of those movies. And I was late to the game to seeing this movie. I had heard about it for so long, and then I finally watched it. And that is Ghost Watch from 1991. And this film, you could kind of consider it, well, you definitely can consider it to be kind of more in step with, if you really love films like Paranormal Activity or, VHS or the, Blair Witch Project, Lake Mungo, that kind of that found footage mockumentary style of horror. This movie's it is made for you. If you haven't seen this movie, I had heard about this movie for on and off for a really long time, and it came out in 1991. So it's by today's standards, it's kind of old school. And my history with this movie is really just the case that I never saw it when I was a kid. I never really heard about. I only heard about this movie Ghost Watch really a few years ago. And there were a couple times, and it's a BBC. It was a BBC special TV. The other thing that's crazy about Ghost Watch is that it was originally, and it still is. It's now on. I was just in Bull Moose. Well, probably a few weeks ago when I went to Bull Moose was the last time I was in Bull Moose, and I noticed they had Ghost Watch on Blu-ray, and I was tempted to get it, and I definitely want to get it. But this Ghost Watch was originally a TV movie also, and it came out in 1991. It was a BBC special, and it was a Halloween special. And the whole story around this movie is pretty amazing and wild. But it was like probably 2 or 3 years ago. I was watching a YouTube guy. I think the name of the channel might have been less than that. I think it was actually less than 2 or 3 years ago. It might have been a year ago. There's a really good YouTube channel out there. Actually, I haven't watched it in a while, but really good horror channel called Cobwebs. And this guy covers all things horror. He spends a lot of time on a lot of more obscure kind of exploitation movies. And during one of his shows, he I think he made a show on kind of that topic of movies that are just fun and just thrilling, but then horror movies that are also like generally scary. And he was talking about Ghost Watch, and I think that might have been the first time I had ever heard of this movie. I don't know how I missed the boat, how I never heard of it. It's a fairly well known documentary, or I should say, not documentary, but mockumentary. It does feel very real. But I had heard about it on Cobwebs probably about a year and a half ago for the first time. So the whole story around Ghost Watch and the way when it was shown, the time period, the whole climate, really, really interesting. So it was Ghost Watch is a British supernatural pseudo mockumentary television show. I'm a big fan of television movies or movies that are shown on television that, especially in the 80s, that were horror based. I mean, movies like Duel, Dark Night of the Scarecrow, even Tourist Trap, even though that wasn't made for television, it was PG, technically rated PG, so it was only on cable. It didn't have an R rating, so it never got it could not get distributed in theaters. So technically it's kind of a TV movie, which is crazy. And I'm a fan too of that thing. Like sometimes, I mean, now cable and the world is very different now, but there's sometimes something really special about having those having those limitations to where you only have a certain amount of tools, so now so you make the best of it. And when it comes to television, horror films, obviously, back in the '80s and '90s, you know, you had to be really careful with the level of violence, profanity, all of those things. So you were like limited, and even gore. So it really brought you back to the essence. I think as a lot, as a movie creator or movie maker, it really brought this thing of like, how can you make this actually scary and memorable, but we know we can't, because of the ratings, we can't get excessively gory. So it dials in that essence as to what horror is. And this came out in 1991, or it says 92 online, but it was written by Stephen Volk and directed by Lindsay Manning. And it was this drama television show mockumentary. It originally aired on Halloween night in the UK, and it was part of this BBC anthology series, Screen One, by Richard Broke, Ruth Barmington, and Derek Nelson. So the interesting thing about Ghostwatch, it was shown on Halloween night in '91, even though it says '92 here, but I believe it was actually '91. But Ghostwatch was a TV movie by BBC, you know, pretty iconic network company that's putting out movies and TV shows, a lot of murder mystery shows for decades upon decades. But Ghostwatch, it premiered on Halloween night, and supposedly I'd heard these stories about Ghostwatch that this movie caused kind of this hysteria in England, that were the majority of people who were watching this television series thought that this thing that they were seeing was real, and that it like legitimately caused this panic in amongst the public. It makes me think, kind of the same scenario or same story, with the famous reading of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles. The famous radio broadcast. I actually have that on CD. I got it at Goodwill a few years ago, and it's pretty scary. But of course, with the Orson Welles reading of War of the Worlds, people tuned into it and not knowing it was, a fictional reading, just like a classic science fiction story. But a lot of people believed that this was something that was legitimately happening, and it generally scared people. And especially then, at that time, people were socially, things were very different. But the interesting story about Ghostwatch was, I heard about this movie, just back and track a little bit, going back a little bit, but I first heard about this movie, and I don't know how I missed this movie. Never heard of it or anything until about a year and a half ago. I watched this really good YouTube channel, Ghost Cobwebs, and this guy was talking about this movie as being a movie that Ghostwatch is like legitimately a scary experience. And he was talking about the history of it and kind of this cultural thing at this movie was a pretty impactful movie. Like, it basically caused a panic and hysteria in all of England, and a lot of people were frightened, and they thought what they were seeing and experiencing in this movie, they thought it was real. And so I, for whatever reason, after seeing and hearing about this movie, I kind of forgot about it again. Some time went by, and then it came up again with some random YouTube video that I come across. Maybe in, I think it was probably around Halloween of last year. I I watched this a few months ago now, and I'm just getting to it. But I heard about for the second time. I heard about Ghost Watch, and it came up, and I'm like, damn, I got okay. I'm just gonna see this movie, and then I came across it on. It was available on YouTube for rental, so I was like, screw it. I couldn't find it anywhere else. Opera House Video, world famous Opera House Video in Belfast, didn't have it. So this was like the second or third time I heard about this movie. So I was like, screw it. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna rent it. And I watched it, rented it on YouTube, and I watched it, and it was really good. It was really good, and I will say that there were moments of it where I could see how this movie, how Ghostwatch caused a panic. Like there's some things about the movie where, and in that kind of context, in a different kind of context, you would be like, holy shit, like there's some shit going down here. Like, okay, I can't really explain what I'm watching. So the whole context of Ghostwatch, again, it premiered in England on BBC, put it out on television. It came out Halloween night. It caused this panic, and supposedly the story goes was it was a really high rated show. It was a very popular show. I think at the time in that on Halloween night, it was one of the most, or maybe even the most watched televised or TV show that was seen by, I think, millions of people, in history, and it was a huge hit, and tons of people tuned in and watched it. But the thing that was funny about it, or not funny, but like what caused kind of this hysteria, and there was like legitimately people were believing that this thing was real, that they were watching, and these events were real, that like there were all these cases of people panicking and calling the police, you know, uh, calling the radio station in panic and kind of terror. And what had happened was, I guess a lot of people that actually watched this movie at night, again, it was on Halloween night. When they went down, when I actually tuned in and started watching Ghost Watch, they turned on their televisions about 10 minutes into the broadcast, into the movie. So, the interesting thing is that in the very beginning of Ghost Watch, before the movie starts, there's a total like disclaimer saying that this movie is a work of fiction. It's just like it's a classic ghost story, but it's a work of fiction. It's all make believe. And there was a big disclaimer at the very very start of this movie. But according to the story, most people that tuned in did not see the disclaimer. So a lot of people tuned in 10 minutes, 20 minutes in. And that was what really threw people totally off. And the basic premise of Ghost Watch is basically it's a mockumentary, and it's very realistic. It feels incredibly real. Like that's one of the things about it. It if you were to watch, and I try to, when I think about the mindset of these people tuning in and not knowing what they're in for, and people were, in the 90s, I think maybe a little bit more, I don't know, reserved, well, especially British culture, but maybe a little bit more reserved or a little bit more conservative. I don't know. That mindset would be it would be different now, than obviously in 2026. So I think of that mindset. But and again, and I finally sat down and watched it, and I will watch this movie, and I will say that it does have this certain kind of realism that, when you're watching it, you feel like you're watching like a newscast, or you know uh, a live television broadcast with interviews. Like it feels so real. And the basic premise of Ghost Watch is it's essentially about this camera crew, this group of scientists, and this camera crew, this little network of people that have this television show. And basically what they do is they go to these houses and that are allegedly haunted, and they interview people who have claimed to have seen ghosts and have had all of these paranormal experiences. And they're basically like this news network that specializes in all things ghost related or paranormal. And the premise of this movie is that they essentially are focusing on this one house where there were a bunch of claims of these people that of this family that had these interactions that were unexplainable, really terrifying, with these different ghosts. And it's basically this camera crew, these people like having where they're in studio talking about this whole story, but then they also go to where they have a camera crew that is actually at the house of this story, and they're interviewing the kids and the mother and the different experiences that they're actually having. And and it's pretty legit. Like, I will say, there's moments in this movie that are legitimately scary, where you're kind of like, okay, I this is working. This has moments of where it's legitimately scary. And I will say, it's so well directed. It totally, it has a rawness to it. It feels real. From what I gathered, I mean, it is a work of fiction. It's a mockumentary. And from what I gathered about reading about Ghost Watch, is that it was all scripted. I think there were areas in the performances where they did kind of improvise. Towards the end of the movie, you start realizing that, okay, this is kind of this is kind of fake, or it's overtly theatrical. It does kind of have that ending towards the end where it's I would if I saw this when it came out, I would. And even watching it now, like, you can tell that it goes into an area where it's overly theatrical, maybe a little bit overly dramatic, and you're like, okay, well, this is obviously a work of fiction. But the build up, the story, the kind of the origins of when they really get into the experiences that these kids are having with these alleged experiences with being visited by ghosts, and the terrifying things that they experience, and also kind of the origin, when they get into the origin of what this ghost or these hauntings are about, it's actually scary, like legitimately scary. There's these sequences too while they're doing this broadcast, where they have this studio, the Ghost Watch organization. That's what they're called in the show, in the movie. They have this studio, and they're having guests come by, different scientists, people who study in the fields of the paranormal. But then they switch back and forth to this camera crew, and it's so realistic the way they did it. Like, you really feel like you're watching a news broadcast. It's really good, ahead of its time too. Like, the whole, the sometimes their connection, there's like these weird delays, and so like the equipment kind of breaks down from it, but then it comes back on. They lose the signal. Like, it's just very realistic and very believable. Like, really, really believable. But when they get into the essence of what, these, of what the alleged real reasons are as to why this haunting is happening, why this family is being, you know, haunted by these ghosts or these spirits, it's pretty scary, and they have these people that call in throughout the broadcast, and it's like a the movie's about I think the movie's about 2 hours, maybe a little less. But the other thing that's really effective with Ghostwatch is throughout the the broadcast and throughout the movie, there are these people who call in. They have a live telephone line. Again, it's fake. They actually give you. The other thing that's really effective is that they have a hotline where the people who are hosting the show encourage the public to call in and to share stories. And so it gives it an even more realistic vibe. Like it makes it even more believable and actually scary. And there's a series of these people that call in and share their stories, and some of these people know a lot more about the history, especially with this house, and it's pretty scary, like legitimately scary. I was impressed. I was really impressed. And I will say, like Ghostwatch, it's a well known movie, but then I think it's a movie that's kind of under the radar for a lot of people. Like for me, totally under the radar. I don't know how the heck I missed this movie because it's awesome. But there are people like when I started checking out this movie more, or after I finally saw it and watched it, I started checking out interviews about it and coming across more and more people online, or especially YouTube, that were talking a lot about this movie. So there are a lot of people out there that do know about it, but it's not as popular as like Blair Witch Project, or the Paranormal Activity found footage films or VHS. But I would say that this movie is definitely, if you're into those movies, it's very much that kind of thing. Lake Mungo is another one. And I just think, you would enjoy this anyway. If you haven't seen it, you would enjoy this anyway, even if you're not into. You don't have to be a fan of the found footage mockumentary style to like this, because it's really well done. But it legitimately has moments of where it's kind of scary, and you start wondering like, what the fuck's going on here? Like this is. It just goes into areas where it just feels more and more unexplainable and believable. And the other thing that I found about this movie was when I was looking it up after I saw it, and initially when I did hear about this movie, there was a lot of hype around this movie. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is one of the scariest movies ever made. It will terrify you. You won't be able to sleep," and all these things. Like this movie was really hyped as being one of the scariest movies around, one of the scariest movies even maybe even made, and one of the just really really hyped, really really praised and really hyped. And a lot of the times when that happens for movies, when it dust settles and you actually see the movie, it's a lot of times you have that situation where things don't really live up to the hype that you hear about, and sometimes that can be pretty silly or superficial when something gets a lot of hype. And I've had that experience of where when you finally sit down, you're like, it's a little bit overrated. It's not quite as good. It's good, or maybe it's not very good. But a lot of times for me, it's been where I hear about something, and then I'm like, okay, I'll finally see it, and it's like, it's okay. It's a little bit overly hyped. I don't really get that, and that's happened big time. But this is a case of where I legitimately think all of the hype that I have heard about Ghostwatch is overall pretty true and pretty spot on. The ending is the only thing that's a little bit, well, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but it does lose a little bit of its realism, because it does get so over the top, and you obviously know that okay, this is no longer really making you believe that this is a real account, if that makes any sense. But the ending is still really, really good. It gets very, it it definitely takes on more tropes of you know demonic possession or ghost stories and those kinds of things. But all before that, it really does create this vibe that's pretty intense. And I wouldn't say the ending, even though the tone of it shifts and the story does shift, it didn't take me out of the movie. I still think the movie is just awesome. So I highly recommend Ghost Watch. It's really, really good. You know, a lot of movies like this, well, TV movies, I mean, we live in the age where there's so many streaming shows, but there's something special about this movie. And there's something special that I feel like we don't see, even though we have all of these streaming television shows now where all these TV series, like there's billions of them. They're impossible to keep up with because there's just so many, and there are good ones. Don't get me wrong, and then a lot of these streaming services that have, their own television shows. They're also doing a lot of full production films, fully realized films. So there's so much out there. But there's something to be said about the 80s and 90s made for television style because, now, obviously, with, the cool thing on one hand is, where you have companies like, I don't know, Hulu or Netflix or what have you, like they have to a degree helped out a lot of directors with their productions, and they don't have any ratings to, or like they don't have to bring any of their material to the rating. They don't have to worry about ratings. They can do a fully realized R-rated movie. They have no limitations, as far as violent or sexual content. They have total freedom to do that, and they're getting financed. So in that regard, it's obviously pretty good. But there's something special about the TV movies that were made in the 80s and 90s because they, and I love copious amounts of gore, violence, and sex, and the whole thing. I love that stuff. But there's something to be said, and I think it was special about that era in the 80s and 90s for the made-for-television movie, where every movie that was being made for the during that time for the TV networks of the time, because of the ratings, they obviously couldn't show violence and gore and copious amounts of sex. So it everything, if it was going to be a part of that particular show or series, it would have to be implied, and they'd have to really be creative with how they would cover those topics. So so there was a lot of limitations, and there's something to be said about creating art with, where you definitely have these perimeters, or even to a degree these boxes that you have to stay in, but yet you really want to tell that story. And there's something to be said. I think that's a lost art form now. Like they don't make movies like this anymore, like Ghost Watch. Like they don't. So definitely check it out. Very worth your time. I definitely want to get it on Blu-ray. And I do feel at the end of the day, it's one of those movies and one of those experiences that if you're a fan of horror, it's legitimately scary. So thanks again. Peace.